Brandon K. Scott of Sports Radio 610 stops by to discuss what are some of his concerns and why is he so high on the Houston Texans defense.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers. Do us three favors. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, thank you to all of our returning guests coming back to listen to Cody and myself continue to talk Texans as we head into the weekend. I'm your Texans football analyst, John Some Sports Guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, you may see the football behind them, but that is Sports Illustrated's own Texans credentialed media member, Cody Davis. As he mentioned, we are joined by Brandon K. Scott for today's show. He'll be talking about his concerns entering training camp, also talking about why he is high on the Texans defense. Major additions this offseason: Danielle Hunter, Danico Autry, drafting Kamari Lassiter, also in free agency, bringing over Azeez Al-Shaair, linebacker, who has a lot of experience playing under D'Amico Ryan. So he'll dive into that. But we want to open up today's show with the YouTube comments. We're going into the weekend. It's always important to hear from our listeners and viewers. I do want to start off by saying, Tom Walker, a few weeks ago, you said it was diabolical that I had a do-rag on with no waves. I don't know, man. Maybe. I don't want to say I got an ocean going on right now, but maybe the Galveston water. I don't know.
Them
man.
days, man. The whole process. I had some waves.
It's been a while. Cody's journey is like the Sahara Desert right now. Maybe the Euphrates is dried up. Right? It's all gone. But
one of the best decisions ever. I came home.
You came home. You ain't pulling the Stephen A. This is on the Will Houston Texans Get Better, a better version of Joe Mixon podcast. We talked about the entity himself, Bill O'Brien, and Noah Perez, 5074, said, "I'll never forgive B.O.B. for that disaster of a playoff game in Kansas City." That probably was the moment the Texans brass should have made the decision to move on from Bill O'Brien. Now, I mean, in hindsight, we probably wouldn't have got to C.J. Stroud and what this team is right now. But that moment was a disaster class of a performance as a coach.
Well, when you say it, of course we would not have CJ. But here's the thing, John. That team was still promising. And it's like I've been mentioning a lot throughout this whole entire offseason. When we take a look at what the Texans can be, you heard me say this before. Me and Sarge talked about it last week. Like, this is the first time that everything fell in order. And when you take a look at that team from 2019, even 2018, the same, because still don't understand how in the world he could not draw up a plan to get the Houston Texans to defeat the Indianapolis Colts. But if the coaching was better, had they would have fired Bill O'Brien like they should have the day after that playoff game against Kansas City, you brought in a better head coach, damn sure a better offensive play caller that can actually build the system around the talent that you had. I'm pretty sure the Houston Texans would still be would have been in a favorable situation over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I know there's other factors that also goes into this. We don't know if those come out or not. But like the one thing about Bill O'Brien, he was just meh. If he was okay with being okay, if he was okay just being meh, you had no desire of getting better regardless of what you had or didn't have, he was the perfect coach. But that team never came close to reaching his ceiling. He is basically the reason why.
Cody, you put it like that. Bill O'Brien sounds like a guy who's going to work his 40 and go home.
That's what it was.
Like, I'm going to work my 40. And people like that, I'm going to tell you something. Every now and then you need those moments where you just got to work your 40. But in this economy, like, you got to get some overtime. You got to put a little extra. You got to do a little something to get over the top. Bill was Monday through Friday, right? I'm working my 40. Bill was one of them coaches or people at the job. We know we're not going to ask him to stay over because he's gonna come up with some reason as to why his 40 was enough. It was good enough for the company. I also want to shout out my man Joshua Sterling, one of our listeners and viewers of the show. Thank you for watching, man. Continue to watch. Tell a friend and tell a friend. Y'all all subscribe. We really appreciate it. Manny Johnson 23. This is actually 2 comments from 2 separate people. Man, y'all be essing. But I'm gonna come back to this thread when Pierce shows the league is really one talent. This is also paired with one of our favorite viewers and listeners, my man X. Now he's 281 H-Town. Now everybody on DP. When I said all along DP was having a sophomore slump due to new coaching scheme, DP has always been him. The Texans are going to have one of the best duos in the league in Mixon and DP. I hope that's the case. We were down on DP because he was down last year. I mean, I think that how many times do we have to justify, right? And I think fans, standing behind players is a good thing. So this is not negative, but Cody and I want to see him bounce back. We are fans of him, right? And one thing Cody mentioned throughout the year, last year, even in the offseason, where things just wasn't right with DP, like just on the field. So we want to be wrong here on the show, right? If we're wrong about things that eventually end up helping Houston get over the hump in some ways, right? Then we'll be happy about that. But our job is to bring like what we see and what's going on and the facts. Last year was a down year, sophomore slump, however you want to put it, new coaching scheme, whatever the case is. He won't be RB1 for this team because they have one. But if he goes out there and again, you cannot rush the ball for 2.8 yards per carry.
Yeah.
That can't be the case. That cannot be the case. And I think that's how you measure success for Damien Pierce going into the training camp, going into preseason, going into next year. Can you go from 2.7, 2.8, whatever it was, to 3.9, 4.1? Right? Can you get back to the 4? That is what a successful year looks like for Damien Pierce, in my opinion, Cody. Also, before we close out and talk to Brandon K. Scott, this comment, Cody, I got to give a shout out to this person. Joni Mitchell, 9423. Great job, guys, on your commentaries. They always say your mama gonna always support you no matter what you do. So shout out to my mama for watching us. This was on the Kamari Lassiter and Kenyon Green took us to the stage show a few days ago. About 3 days ago was a comment. Shout out to my mom. I really appreciate the support. We and tell a friend at the church, at the schoolhouse, wherever you are. Go and subscribe to my babies, Cody and I show. But SS4 Key, I can admit when I saw the 40 time talking about Kamari last week, when I saw the 40 time, I was hesitant. Watching his tape and comparing it with the plays he's made so far, he's just a good corner, plain and simple. He gets out of his breaks fast. We told you guys that. He gets out of his breaks fast. He has a great short area quickness, and like John said, plays with great anticipation. And being a top corner at Georgia, there's not many things he hasn't seen at wide receiver. I just can't wait for the pass because that's when his game will really show. I think a lot of people are going to be impressed by Kamari Lassiter.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of that, being impressed may come with getting over doubt that was there. Kind of like myself and CJ Henderson when you gave me your notes and talked about how CJ was in OTAs and practice. Like, oh man, I'm impressed because I didn't think he was going to do that much. But as a young dog, he is a young dog. Kamari, I think, is going to be a guy that was Stingley. We figured he'll come into the league ready. Kamari will be getting ready, and once he hits that top final version, you're going to look at Kamari and Derek Stingley like, oh, wow, this is one of the better 1-2 punches at cornerbacks in the NFL, Cody.
Yeah, look, OTAs and minicamp prove that Kamari Lassiter is him. I know you guys probably heard me say that again, but I was just so impressed. I know a lot of people want to talk about the 40 time him, making defensive plays on CJ and Stephon Diggs. But for me, John, it's the fact that he's getting everything so fast, and that's been the most impressive thing with me because I've covered a lot of these young prospects in the NFL and in the NBA. And when you are going through the early stages of training camp, mini camp, OTAs and stuff, you can see them kind of playing a lot slower because they're trying to process everything. They're trying to make sure that they hit everything that the coaches want them to hit, trying to execute what the veterans are telling them in the locker room and stuff. They try to help them speed up their process. They're taking their time. I mean, look, the perfect example was CJ Stroud. Those first 2 weeks of training camp, CJ, he looked okay throwing interceptions and stuff, but it was okay because he was just taking his time trying to process everything. And once he got it, of course, you guys see the young man took off. Now entering his second season as without a doubt, a top 5 quarterback. But for Kamari, man, I'm not saying that he's about to be on the same trajectory as CJ, but it's just watching him understand and execute everything so fast, man. There was moments watching him at mandatory minicamp where he did not look like a rookie. He already looked like a veteran. And I cannot wait to see how that young man is going to continue developing when training camp start. Look, when the Texans drafted him, I had my concern. Brandon K. Scott had his concerns. And on the other side, coming up next, B. Scott is going to tell you why that Kamari Lassiter is part of the reason why he is extremely excited about this Houston Texans defense.
Passion, drive, patience. That's what's going to take for the Houston Texans to get over that hump and win a championship. But it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. With eBay Motors, they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Listen, guys, whether you're into speed like Tank Dell, whether you're into power like Titus Howard, or whether you're into style like Stephon Diggs, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP of the road and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. And you guys should know this voice. Y'all guys see who this is. Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. B. Scott, what's going on, man? And welcome back to Locked On Texans.
Man, I appreciate you for having me. Everything is good. Everything is lovely over here. And, man, I always feel at home when I'm on the Locked On Texans podcast. I'm with the Locked On Texans family. So, again, appreciate you for having me, extending that hospitality, bro.
And, you guys, I love having B. Scott on because B. Scott, like myself, spend just about every single day during the regular season at NRG Stadium looking at these players and stuff. But B. Scott, as you saw, we finally had an opportunity to get what I like to call a preview of the 2024 Texans. Before we get into the concerns that you have, I want you to start off. What excites you the most about this year versions of the Houston Texans?
Oh, well, I mean, the exciting part is obviously the offense and CJ Stroud in year 2, the step that he is expected to take, and that I think a lot of us think he's going to take. I think an underrated storyline is Bobby Slowick and Gerard Johnson coming back. And I want to see, so the thing I'm most excited about watching is how Bobby Slowick in year 2 and of course, CJ Stroud in year 2, how they navigate the situation with all these new weapons that they got, namely Stephon Diggs, but also, you got Joe Mixon. They drafted Cade Stover, who seems to have a really great relationship, not only with CJ Stroud, but it seems to have built, for a guy who has never played an NFL game, seems to have built quite the reputation for himself in that building. So I'm most excited about the offense and what it's going to look like in year 2 of Stroud, Slowick, with the additions that they've made. I'm probably most intrigued, and we'll get in. I know we're going to talk about the defense here in this episode, but I'm most intrigued by what is Kamari Lassiter? Like, how good is he? I think there has been a little bit of assumption that Kamari Lassiter is not going to be able to do this or that because of the 40 time. And I think also the fact that he was the third corner taken in that run of corners.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about it, it's like, okay, 2 corners went ahead of him, 2 corners that probably more people knew about went ahead of him. And then we were together there at NRG when they drafted him.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, okay. So you get the third corner, and then you look up and you're like, oh, 4.6 in the 40. So is this just like the leftovers, or is this like a hidden gem? And did the Texans actually get, and this is not to say this is independent of what Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid McKinstry end up doing, but were the Texans able to still get a starting caliber cornerback in Kamari Lassiter with that pick after those other 2 guys went, and despite that 40 time? I'm really, really intrigued by that based off of what we saw at minicamp, at the OTAs and at the minicamp and how he was making plays. So I don't know if I know enough about that situation to be excited about it, but I am very, very intrigued and will be monitoring it.
What do you think the potential of the 2024 draft class can be? Because B. Scott, the last 2 years, you look at the class of 2022, of course, the class of 2023 with CJ and Will, there was a lot of excitement, and you knew right off the back a lot of those guys, with the exception maybe with a few, those guys were going to be day one starters. However, with the 2024 draft class, and me and John have talked about this a lot, majority of these guys now, excluding Kamari Lassiter, because it seemed like he might be a day one starter, but a lot of these guys are going to be used for depth purposes and stuff. But when you take a look at this draft class, what do you think the potential can actually be?
Well, the thing that I think is most interesting about the draft class is how the first 3 guys that they drafted, Kamari Lassiter, Kalen Bullock, and I should say Kamari Lassiter, Blake Fisher, and Kalen Bullock were all super, super young dudes, like 3 years of college, either 21 years old or getting ready to turn. They're all 21 now. But Kalen Bullock, I want to say, was drafted. The Texans drafted him a couple of days before his 21st birthday. So those 3 guys are all really young guys with potential. And then the rest of the draft picks, let's say, what is it? The next 6 after that, the guys that they drafted were all like older, more experienced college players. I call them the COVID era, COVID generation college players who got to play an extra year, a 5th year, a 6th year in some cases, and are coming into the league really as grown-ups. I know they're rookies and they're going to have to go through whatever rookie learning curve exists for their respective positions. But I also think they have a really cool combination of young talent that has a chance to contribute sooner rather than later, perhaps right away for a couple of them. When you talk about Kamari Lassiter and maybe Bullock as well, we'll see the health and the performance of the tackles and figure out how long it takes Blake Fisher to actually get on the field. But I'm really intrigued by the youth of the first 3 picks. Put Cade Stover right there in the middle as the guy that it seems like they've talked the most highly about and spoken the most highly of. So put a pin in that. And then everybody else that was drafted is, like I said, a more experienced college player who might be able to come in and be more like a professional right away, even if it is as a depth piece. So I think it's a mostly depth draft, but I wouldn't sleep on the potential impact that a Kamari Lassiter could have as a starting corner. Kalen Bullock is a flat-out playmaker. I don't know how long it's going to take them to get his physicality up to speed, in terms of being physical enough to tackle in the NFL and to be out there with NFL players. But if the ball is in the air and he's on the field, I like his chances of going up to go get it. Seems to have a knack for the ball and a knack for making plays once he gets it. And then, of course, like we mentioned, Blake Fisher, that's one to really pay attention to because both of the starting offensive tackles are coming off injuries and surgeries, and they might need the young kid. They might need the young player. So I think there's plenty of potential there, even though it's not the sexiest draft because you didn't have the first round picks and you don't have the, hey, this is the future of the franchise type of player. But in terms of quality and depth, I'm very intrigued by this rookie class.
Last week, I had Sarge on, and the conversation just gradually just went tours talking a lot about the offense. But B Scott, I want to ask you, what excites you most about this defense? Because for me personally, before we had an opportunity to watch them doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, I always knew that the defense was going to be good. However, now that I had an opportunity to literally watch them, I feel better about them.
I felt like the defense was the story of minicamp.
Mm-hmm.
It was the story of minicamp between what we talked about already with Kamari Lassiter, hearing how players, coaches, and even later on, Nick Caserio earlier, or I guess this would have been last week now, going on Pain and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610 and also talking about this player. But the fact that Azeez Al-Shair's name kept coming up and that it seemed very clear from players on both sides of the ball, coaches and management, that he is a clear leader on that defense. And obviously he's playing a leadership position as the Mike linebacker, but not shy about it. There doesn't seem to be like any question about it in terms of his leadership and the expected role that he's going to play on the team. So I would say I'm most excited about the pass rush. I think that this team is going to make a tremendous improvement from middle of the pack as pass rushers in sacks to hopefully top 8, maybe top 5. Like, you got two dynamic guys specifically in Will Anderson Jr. and Daniil Hunter on the edge, but also throw Danico Autry into the mix, whether he's spelling one of those other guys as a backup or rushing on the inside. You know, like I think that is, you know, they signed 2 double-digit sack guys to go with the defensive rookie of the year that they, I'm sure, expect to develop his game and to eventually be a double-digit sack guy himself. So if I was to nail it down to one thing, I would say the pass rush, specifically Will Anderson Jr. and Will in year 2, knowing that he needs to diversify or add to his pass rushing repertoire. He's self-aware of that, and I feel like he's worked on that. And so I'm very excited to see how that manifests itself on the football field, because we know Will Anderson Jr. got a hell of a bull rush. He got a hell of a motor, and he's tough to deal with. Probably stronger than he looks, all of those things. But, man, if he becomes an expert in the hand fighting and in the counters and knowing what moves to make and win and all of the nuances of pass rushing that exist, if he sort of masters that, I am very, very intrigued. Very, very intrigued and excited about what the Texans pass rush might look like.
There's a lot of excitement surrounding the Houston Texans entering the 2024 season. But coming up, B. Scott is going to let you guys know what are some of his concerns entering training camp. Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. B. Scott, you know, 2024, a lot of people, including myself, I can't lie, we haven't really talked a lot about concerns because everything just looks so promising and new. And that's a good thing, given what we were about 2 years ago on this day. However, B. Scott, I thought it was very interesting that you said that you had some concerns about this team entering, let's say, training camp as of right now. So, floor is yours. What are some of your concerns?
Yeah, man. And so almost all of it is exclusively on the defensive side of the ball. And that's kind of been a theme of what we've discussed so far on this show. But as excited as I am about the pass rush, as pleasantly surprised and excited as I am to hear them talk about Kamari Lassiter and just the way he's made his transition so far as a rookie in OTAs and minicamp, I still wonder if they're a little bit light in the middle. You know, like, we talked about this since, you know, ever since it became clear that Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins weren't going to be on this team any longer. Malik Collins because they traded him to the 49ers, Rankins because they lost him in free agency to the Cincinnati Bengals. But it's still a little bit of an unknown. And I've been willing to concede, Cody, and I just want to be humble enough to do this. I don't know, man. I don't know how good Tim Settle is. I don't know how good Foley Fatukasi is. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Enough at least to say for sure that they are light up the middle. But I do think it's a question. It's a question mark until we see it. By not knowing, it's not something that I feel like I can check off, check the box off the list or anything like that. So it's okay. Let's see how this goes. Let's see how this goes up the middle. And as long as we're talking about up the middle, look, the Azeez Al-Shaair thing is great. Christian Harris developing in year 3 sounds great. But if anything happens to either one of those two guys, who's their backup? Like, I know Henry To'oTo'o, and maybe that's a perfectly situated role for him, is to be there and to be available if Azeez is not able to go, because they're both Mike linebackers. But it's hard to say that I feel great about the depth of the linebacker position for as good as I feel about the depth of, say, edge rusher. Because even outside of the obvious, Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., you feel good about some of what you have behind that for, for the purposes of a backup. But with the linebacker situation, if there's an injury, you could argue, but before Christian Harris came on at the end of the year, Blake Cashman for a while was their best linebacker. Well, even he started the season off injured, so it's like you got to kind of account for that. Where is your depth? Got a little bit of concern about it. If Kamari Lassiter is the outside corner, okay, that solves your problem there. But okay, so now how do you feel about the competition for the nickel spot between CJ Henderson, Jeff Okudah, and Desmond King is still around? So, those are just questions. I think the biggest question is the way things look up the middle or their interior defensive line. And then I would say the depth at linebacker would be right behind that. But those are some concerns for me of, hey, if you're trying to find the weak link, or if you don't really know exactly how to feel about this thing, and training camp, maybe you get a better sense for it. Preseason, maybe you get a better sense for it. It's definitely that interior defensive line, because there are things to feel good about, and there are some unknowns beyond those things. And I didn't even mention safety, right? Safety I think is a hot button issue, a hot button topic. I don't know if I'm fooling myself for thinking that there is some potential for bounce back there. I'm trying to have less concern about the safety position as most people, but I think it's a fair question. It's a question that's out there. So basically everything up the middle, right? The interior defensive line, the linebackers, and then the safeties. How is that going to play itself out?
I do like the fact that you point out the linebacker position, because that's something me and John talked about a little bit, but for me, I feel like it goes more into how much faith and can Henry To'oTo'o make that leap in year 2 like we are expecting him to. The interior defensive line, I did have my concerns. However, I do believe that Coach D'Amico Ryans would probably utilize Autry in the middle a lot more. I remember when we talked about this conversation, I believe earlier this week, Autry played really good as an interior defensive lineman, especially during his first 2 years with the Indianapolis Colts, if I'm not mistaken, looked really well. However, the one concern that I do have does come in your defensive backfield at the safety unit. B. Scott, how much faith do you have in Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward that they could have that bounce back season? Because you was right there and we had an opportunity to talk to Jalen Petrie a few weeks ago, and the one thing that I held on to was when he was asked, what are some of the lessons that you can take for your first 2 seasons that can help you in 2024 year 3. I can't believe we're already in year 3 for Jalen Petrie. He said what he learned was how to control his aggression. And that was telling to me, because there was a lot of times where it just seemed like he was just, I don't know if he was like antsy or he was just wanting to make the right play all the time, given what he did during his rookie campaign. Now, when we had an opportunity to watch him doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, it seemed like before he made his move, he was processing everything. And I think that is where he's going to take a big forward in 2024.
Yeah, it's like he's an example, or had been an example of when you do too much and when you're doing so much that you end up not doing anything.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can apply to a lot of different life situations where you're trying a little too hard, or maybe you're aggression is not controlled or is out of control or is too aggressive, whatever the case may be, and you end up overshooting or you end up, being so aggressive that you're not effective or you're mistake prone to mistake, it takes you off your attention to detail. That's because you're pressing, you want to make a play so bad. So I think there's an element of that with him. I think there's got to be two things with Jalen Petrie. He's got to do what he talked about, and that's finding a way to control his aggression a lot better, a lot more. But also, I think it's going to be up to the Texans to figure out what is the best way to use him, and if maybe some of the things that they were asking him to do, requiring him to do last year, might not just speak best to his skill set. And maybe trying to figure out exactly what that is. I've thought for a while that Jalen Petrie is best operating closer to the line of scrimmage, which is why I wondered if that's a reason why they experimented a little bit with him in a nickel spot a couple of times while we were watching practice over the last couple of weeks. If it means that in certain packages, maybe Jalen Petrie turns into a glorified linebacker, an extra defensive back who kind of has got a little, he's obviously too small to be a linebacker, but he's got like a little bit of linebacker in his game. And so do they do, dime packages where, they got extra defensive backs out there, but Jalen Petrie is closer to the line of scrimmage? Does having Kalen Bullock, and is he ready to play? And if he is having him sort of bail out these other guys who maybe playing center field and making sure you don't get beat deep is not their best either skill set or something that is, past their ability at this stage in their career when you're talking about Jimmy Ward. So I'd be lying if I said that the confidence level was exactly high based off of what I saw last year. But I do feel like Jalen Petrie, or I've always felt like Jalen Petrie does have the right makeup, the correct makeup to learn from mistakes and to apply lessons into his game. But I think in order for him to be successful, they're going to have to re-envision what his role and what his game actually is. Like what is, I don't want to say he's in an identity crisis, but I do think it's up to the coaches, really all of them, to figure out where is the best place to have him on the field. What's the best way to use him so he can make plays? Maybe making sure that they don't get beat deep is not the role that Jalen Petrie plays on this team. But that's not to say that he can't be a maniac around the line of scrimmage the way we've seen him be at different times throughout his career, throughout the last couple of years. Even last year as he struggled, it always seemed like he had a knack for getting to the ball the closer it is to the line of scrimmage, So I'm interested in that, and if they might use him in a different way and what that looks like. But Jalen Petrie has, I think, the right makeup and intangibles to have a bounce back year. It's just hard to really beat the drum and say that he's going to do it without sounding like a homer based off of some of what we saw last year.
Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. B. Scott, really quick, where can the listeners follow you at on all your social media platforms? And be sure to tell them where they can listen to you at next week on Sports Radio 610.
Yeah, man. So I'm at Brandon K. Scott on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm at B. Scott from Hiram Clark on Instagram. But you can also catch the B Block podcast every week. You can catch the H-Town Hoops podcast every week, which I do with Adam Spillane, the H-Town Hoops podcast, that is, on the Rockets. So make sure that y'all are checking those out. And then also, feel like I'm on the radio just about every day, Cody.
I know, man.
I was going to say, man, just tune in to Sports Radio 610, and at some point between 6 a.m. and 6 p, you're liable to hear your boy. But like you mentioned, man, I'm recording this with you fresh off of doing the drive with Ron Hughley. I was in for Clint Sterner, excuse me. And next week I'll be in with John Lopez for a few days, doing In the Loop, which, as you all know, or as certainly as you know, Cody, and as maybe some of the listeners know, I'm a regular part of that show weekly.
Yes, sir.
Thursdays at 11 a.m. You can bank on it. I'm going to be there. Now, not this week because I've been doing the fill-in work that I've been doing, but make sure y'all check me out on In the Loop next week, Tuesday through Thursday Tuesday through Thursday of next week, I'll be on In the Loop with John Lopez and Figgy Fig, and we're going to have a good time, man.
And that's from 10 to 2, which I'm pretty sure everybody that rocks with this podcast already know that.
In the loop from 10 to 2 Central Time. It's just in case we got some outside the time zone listeners and viewers and audience members with the Locked On Texans podcast. That is 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time on Sports Radio 610 over the air, on Sports Radio 610 through the Odyssey app. And, of course, you can watch Sports Radio 610 live on YouTube and Twitch.
Yes, sir. And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTY DAVIS _24. And please be sure to follow my co-host, John Hickman, at John _Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.